Every night a small puppy curled up outside the doors of the town hospital, braving the cold and darkness. When Dr. Thomas finally took notice and uncovered the truth behind the puppy's behavior, he was brought to tears. What could have driven such loyalty and pain in this little creature? It was a frosty winter evening, and the golden glow of the hospital's lights reflected off the icy pavement. Patients and visitors hurried in and out, bundled in coats and scarves. But one figure stood out amidst the bustling scene, a small puppy with matted fur and tired eyes. He lay curled up just outside the revolving doors. Despite the bitter cold, the little dog didn't seek warmth or food. He stayed, staring intently at the entrance as though waiting for someone. Dr. Thomas Walker, a senior pediatrician with a reputation for being all work and no nonsense, noticed the puppy for the first time that evening as he exited the hospital. The dog's unwavering gaze stopped him in his tracks. "What's he doing here?" he muttered under his breath, tightening his scarf. A nurse passing by overheard him. "He's been here every evening for weeks." Dr. Walker: "Poor thing must be waiting for someone inside." Thomas frowned. Someone inside. His gaze lingered on the small creature, a pang of sympathy piercing his usually stoic demeanor. The dog's eyes seemed to hold a story, one of loss or longing. A story Thomas couldn't yet understand. The following evening, Dr. Walker exited the hospital once again, his mind heavy with thoughts of overdue reports and a full schedule for the next day. But there, in the exact same spot, was the puppy. Snow had begun to fall, tiny flakes sticking to the dog's fur. But he remained still, his focus never wavering from the entrance. Thomas hesitated. He wasn't an animal lover, nor did he have the time to become one, but something about the dog tugged at his heart. He walked over cautiously, crouching down a few feet away. "You're still here, huh?" he said softly, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. The puppy lifted his head slightly, ears twitching but didn't move closer. His eyes, deep pools of emotion, met Thomas's. The doctor felt a lump in his throat, an unfamiliar surge of emotion rising within him. "Do you have an owner?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course, the dog didn't respond, but his eyes seemed to say everything. The janitor from the previous night strolled by, broom in hand. "You talking to that mutt again, Doc?" he teased. "That dog's been here for weeks. Some folks say he's waiting for someone, a patient maybe." Thomas glanced back at the hospital. The thought gnawed at him. Was the puppy's owner inside, lying in one of the sterile hospital beds? Or worse, had they already passed, leaving this loyal companion behind? Over the next few nights, Thomas began to notice the puppy more and more. Each evening, as he left the hospital, the dog was there. He never barked, never begged, just sat quietly, watching. Thomas found himself lingering by the entrance longer than usual, trying to piece together the mystery. One particularly cold evening, unable to bear the sight of the shivering pup, Thomas brought him a small blanket from his car. "Here, this should help," he said, draping it gently over the dog. To his surprise, the puppy allowed it, his big trusting eyes briefly meeting Thomas's before turning back to the hospital doors. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The image of the lonely dog haunted him. Was he neglecting someone in need? His job was to save lives, to provide care. But here was a life outside his hospital. Seemingly slipping through the cracks, the next morning Thomas made a decision. During his lunch break, he asked the receptionist at the front desk if anyone had reported a missing dog. "Not that I know of," she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "You think he belongs to a patient?" "Maybe," Thomas said, his mind racing. "Let me know if anyone asks about him." By the end of the week, Thomas's curiosity had turned into a quiet determination. He started leaving food and water for the puppy each night, noting with satisfaction that the bowls were empty by morning. But despite his efforts, the dog remained distant, his loyalty tied to the hospital's doors. One evening, as Thomas sat in his car preparing to drive home, he saw the dog again, curled up in his usual spot. The doctor sighed, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Why won't you leave?" he muttered to himself. The question wasn't born out of frustration, but a growing sense of helplessness. He felt like he was failing this tiny creature who seemed to be waiting for something, or someone Thomas couldn't provide. It wasn't until the following weekend that Thomas's routine was broken. As he approached the hospital's entrance, he noticed a group of nurses huddled near the dog. One of them, a kind-hearted woman named Sarah, was stroking the puppy's head. He finally let someone touch him, she said, smiling as Thomas approached. It's like he's starting to trust us. Thomas knelt down, his hand hovering just above the dog's fur. Is that true, buddy? Are you warming up to us? Slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the soft matted coat. The puppy didn't pull away. Instead, he looked up at Thomas, his eyes brimming with a mixture of hope and sadness. In that moment, Thomas knew he couldn't ignore the dog any longer. He had to find out the truth. Why was this little soul so devoted to the hospital? And what or who was he waiting for? The next morning, Dr. Walker arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. He had spent most of the night thinking about the puppy. Who was this dog waiting for? And why couldn't he shake the feeling that this wasn't just about loyalty, but something deeper? He stopped by the reception desk again. Any updates on a missing dog? He asked, hoping for a breakthrough. The receptionist shook her head. Sorry, Dr. Walker, no reports, no inquiries. It's like he just showed up and made this place his home. Thomas sighed, glancing toward the hospital entrance where he knew the dog would be. The idea of leaving the mystery unsolved was gnawing at him. He decided to take a proactive step. After his morning rounds, he approached Sarah, the nurse who had connected with the dog the night before. Sarah, he began, his tone resolute. I think we need to do more. That dog isn't here by accident. Sarah tilted her head. How you really care about him, don't you? Thomas hesitated, then nodded. It's hard to explain. There's something about him. I feel like we're missing something important. Sarah smiled. Well, I have a friend at the animal shelter. Maybe they can help us check if he's chipped. That's a start, Thomas agreed. Let's do it. That evening, Sarah brought a leash and coaxed the dog into letting her slip it on, to everyone's surprise. The puppy followed without resistance, his small frame trembling slightly as they led him inside. Thomas felt a pang of guilt watching the dog's nervous movements. He didn't want to scare him, but this was necessary. At the shelter, the staff scanned the dog for a microchip. Nothing, the technician said, frowning. He's not registered anywhere. Thomas clenched his jaw. So, what now? We could post his picture online, Sarah suggested. See if anyone recognizes him. The shelter staff agreed, snapping a photo of the dog and posting it to local community boards and social media. If he has an owner, they'll see this, the technician assured them. Thomas nodded, but deep down he wasn't convinced. If the dog had an owner, why had no one come looking for him all this time? The following days brought no answers, and Thomas grew increasingly attached to the little dog. Though he hadn't brought him home, he found himself spending more time outside the hospital with him. The dog's quiet presence was oddly comforting, a contrast to the constant chaos of the pediatric ward. One evening, as Thomas sat on the steps beside the dog, he spoke aloud, his voice soft and contemplative. You know, I never really thought much about loyalty until I met you. My job. It's all about routine, fixing things, moving on. But you're different. You're staying here no matter what. The dog tilted his head slightly as if listening. Thomas chuckled. You're a better listener than most of my colleagues. The humor faded as he looked into the puppy's eyes, which seemed to hold a depth of sadness and hope that Thomas couldn't ignore. Who are you waiting for? He whispered. The mystery deepened the next day when Thomas overheard a conversation between two elderly patients in the waiting area. That dog reminds me of a story I heard, one of them said, her voice low and thoughtful, about a dog that waited for his owner outside a train station for years after he passed away. Thomas froze. Could that be the case here? Had the dog's owner died, leaving him with nowhere to go? The thought sent a chill through him. Determined to find out more, Thomas asked Sarah to help him check patient records. I know it's a long shot, he admitted. But what if the dog's owner was admitted here and never made it out? Sarah hesitated. That's a sensitive area, Thomas, but I can see how much this means to you. Let's see what we can find. They spent hours combing through records from the past month looking for any patients who might match the timeline of the dog's arrival. Finally, Sarah gasped. Thomas, look at this. She pointed to the file of an elderly man named Edward Langley. He had been admitted 3 weeks earlier after a heart attack and had passed away shortly after. He lived alone, Sarah said, scanning the notes. No next of kin. Thomas's stomach sank. Could this be it? Was the dog his? It's possible, Sarah replied, her voice somber. But how would the dog have known to come here? Thomas shook his head. I don't know, but I think we need to look into this more. That evening, Thomas found himself sitting on the hospital steps once again. The dog curled up beside him. Edward Langley, he murmured, testing the name. The dog's ears twitched slightly and Thomas's breath caught. Is that it? Was he your person? The dog didn't move in, but his eyes seemed to soften as if acknowledging the name. Thomas felt a lump rise in his throat. If that's true, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry you lost him. For the first time, Thomas reached out and stroked the dog's fur, his movements gentle and careful. The puppy leaned into his touch, and Thomas felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly. I'll make sure of that. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the name Edward Langley. If the dog belonged to him, there had to be more to the story. Driven by a mix of curiosity and determination, he decided to visit Edward's listed address, hoping to find clues about the bond between the man and the dog. The house was a modest, single-story home at the edge of town. The garden was overgrown, the paint peeling from the shutters, but it still held a sense of warmth, like a place that had been loved. Thomas hesitated at the door, unsure of what he was expecting to find. After a moment, he knocked, no answer. He tried the handle and found it locked. Feeling slightly awkward, he stepped back and scanned the area. A neighbor watering her plants nearby noticed him. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice wary. Thomas raised a hand in greeting. "Hi, I'm Dr. Walker. I work at the hospital where Edward Langley was admitted. I've been trying to learn more about him." The woman lowered her watering can, her expression softening. "Edward. Oh, bless his soul. Such a kind man. Always kept to himself. But you'd never meet anyone more loyal." "Did he have a dog?" Thomas asked. The woman's face brightened. "Oh yes, a little one. Brown with the sweetest eyes. That dog followed Edward everywhere. You wouldn't see one without the other." Thomas's heart sank. "Do you know what happened to the dog after Edward passed?" She frowned, wiping her hands on her apron. "I assumed he ran off. Poor thing must have been heartbroken." Thomas glanced toward the hospital, visible in the distance. "He's been waiting outside the hospital for weeks." The woman gasped. "He's still there." "Oh, that dog loved Edward more than anything. If he's there, it's because he doesn't know Edward's gone. He's probably waiting for him to come back." Back at the hospital, Thomas shared the revelation with Sarah. "It all makes sense now," he said, pacing the break room. "The dog's loyalty wasn't random. How's grieving?" Sarah nodded, her expression somber. "But what do we do now? He can't stay outside forever." "I don't know yet," Thomas admitted, "but I feel responsible for him. Edward's gone and there's no one else. Maybe I can take him in." Sarah gave him a small smile. "You've grown attached, haven't you?" Thomas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess I have. He's been through so much. I can't just leave him like this." That evening, Thomas approached the dog with a leash and a soft voice. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. "How about coming with me for a while? I'll take care of you." The dog hesitated, his tail wagging uncertainly. Slowly, he let Thomas slip the leash over his neck. For the first time, the little dog followed him willingly, not to a shelter, but to Thomas's car. At home, Thomas set up a cozy bed in the corner of his living room and filled a bowl with fresh food and water. The dog sniffed around cautiously before settling into his new spot. "It's not the hospital," Thomas said softly, crouching beside him. "But I hope you'll feel safe here." Over the next few days, the dog began to adjust. He followed Thomas from room to room, his trust growing with each passing moment. Thomas couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection with the little creature. For the first time in years, his home felt less empty, but the peace didn't last one evening. As Thomas was finishing dinner, he noticed the dog sitting by the door, his tail wagging anxiously. "What is it, buddy?" he asked, setting down his fork. The dog whined softly, pawing at the door. Thomas frowned, opening it to let him out into the yard. Instead of wandering off, the dog turned and looked at him, his eyes pleading. Then he darted toward the street, stopping to look back as if urging Thomas to follow, confused but intrigued. Thomas grabbed his coat and followed the dog down the quiet Saint. The little dog led him through winding alleys and across intersections until they arrived at a park on the outskirts of town. "What are we doing here?" Thomas asked, his breath visible in the chilly night air. The dog barked softly and trotted ahead. Thomas followed him to a secluded bench under a street lamp. There, sitting on the bench, was an envelope with the name Edward Langley scrawled across the front. Thomas's heart raced as he picked it up. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink smudged in places, but still legible. The opening words sent chills down his spine. "My dearest companion, if you're reading this, it means I've left this world, but I need you to know how much you meant to me." Thomas read the letter aloud, his voice trembling. It was a heartfelt message from Edward, written as though he was speaking directly to his beloved dog. It spoke of gratitude, love, and a wish for the dog to find happiness, even in his absence. By the time Thomas finished reading, tears were streaming down his face. The little dog sat quietly beside him, his head resting on Thomas's knee as if he too understood the weight of the words. "Edward loved you so much," Thomas whispered, stroking the dog's fur. "And now I promise to honor that love." The discovery of Edward's letter weighed heavily on Thomas's mind as he drove home. The little dog curled up in the passenger seat beside him. The letter had confirmed what Thomas already suspected. This dog was more than just a stray. He had been someone's entire world, and now he was left behind, searching for answers that he might never find. Back at the house, Thomas placed the letter carefully on his kitchen counter. He brewed a cup of tea, needing something to calm the swirl of emotions inside him. The dog sat by his feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor. "You really are incredible, aren't you?" Thomas said, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "I don't think I've ever met anyone as loyal as you." The dog tilted his head as if listening and let out a soft whine. Thomas chuckled. Okay, I get it. You're hungry." He filled the dog's bowl with food and sat beside him while he ate, the rhythmic crunching oddly comforting. As the days went by, Thomas noticed a change in himself. He had always been dedicated to his work, but for the first time he felt a sense of purpose beyond the hospital walls. Taking care of the dog brought a new rhythm to his life. Morning walks, shared meals, and quiet evenings together on the couch. It wasn't long before he found himself calling the dog Max, a name that seemed to fit his brave and steadfast personality. But Max's adjustment to this new life wasn't without its challenges. Though he had grown attached to Thomas, there were moments when his loyalty to Edward resurfaced. Some evenings, Max would sit by the door, staring out into the darkness, as if waiting for someone who would never return. The other times he would bark at the sound of a passing car, his ears perking up, hopefully before drooping in disappointment. One night, as Thomas worked on paperwork at the kitchen table, he noticed Max pacing restlessly. "What's wrong, buddy?" Thomas asked, setting down his pen. Max barked once, then trotted over to the counter where Edward's letter lay. He poured at the edge of the counter, looking up at Thomas with pleading eyes. "You miss him, don't you?" Thomas whispered, kneeling beside Max. "I can't bring Edward back, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make you happy." Max licked Thomas's hand, his tail wagging faintly. Thomas took that as a sign of trust, a fragile, growing bond between them. Meanwhile, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Edward's story. The letter, heartfelt as it was, hinted at a deeper struggle. Why had Edward been in the hospital? What had happened in the days leading up to his passing? The questions gnawed at Thomas, compelling him to dig deeper. He returned to the hospital and reviewed Edward's file. It revealed that Edward had been battling a terminal illness for months, a fact he had kept hidden from nearly everyone. His final days had been spent in solitude, his only comfort, the companionship of Max. The realization hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. Edward hadn't just loved Max, he had relied on him. In a world that had grown increasingly lonely, Max had been Edward's one constant. Thomas shared his findings with Sarah, who listened intently. "It's heartbreaking," she said, shaking her head. "But it makes sense now. That dog wasn't just loyal. He was grieving." Thomas nodded. "I want to do something for Edward. For Max. They both deserve better than what happened." Sarah smiled softly. "You already are, Thomas. You're giving Max a new chance at life. And I think Edward would have wanted that." Inspired, Thomas decided to honor Edward's memory in a tangible way. He reached out to the neighbor who had spoken so fondly of Edward and asked for her help. Together they planned a small memorial service in Edward's favorite park. Word spread quickly, and soon other neighbors and acquaintances who had known Edward began offering to contribute, bringing flowers, sharing stories, and even donating to a local animal shelter in his name. On the day of the memorial, Thomas brought Max to the park. The little dog seemed to sense the significance of the gathering, sitting quietly by Thomas's side as people shared their memories of Edward. Some spoke of his kindness, others of his quiet strength. Many mentioned Max, noting how inseparable the two had been. When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he held Edward's letter in his hand. "Edward may no longer be with us," he began, his voice steady, despite the emotions swelling in his chest. "But his love and loyalty live on in Max. This little dog is a testament to the kind of man Edward was, someone who gave everything he had even in his final days." The crowd murmured in agreement, and a wave of warmth washed over Thomas as he looked down at Max. "I promise to take care of him," he continued, his voice firm, "to honor Edward's memory by giving Max the life he deserves as the sunset." Painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Thomas felt a profound sense of closure. The memorial had not only honored Edward but also deepened his connection to Max. For the first time, Max seemed truly at ease, resting his head on Thomas's lap as they watched the crowd disperse. That night, back at home, Thomas tucked Edward's letter into a frame and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of the bond between a man and his dog, and the legacy of love they had left behind. With the memorial service behind them, Thomas felt a renewed sense of responsibility for Max. The little dog had become an integral part of his life, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Yet as comforting as Max's presence was, there was a lingering question Thomas couldn't ignore. Why had Edward left Max at the hospital rather than arranging for someone to take care of him directly? This mystery lingered in the back of Thomas's mind, growing more insistent as he pieced together Edward's story. One evening, as Thomas sat on the couch with Max curled up beside him, he decided to dig deeper. Edward's neighbor had mentioned a sister, someone Edward had been estranged from for years. If anyone had more insight into Edward's final days, it would be her. The next day, Thomas tracked down Edward's sister, Clara, using the hospital records and information provided by the neighbor. He found her living in a modest home on the outskirts of the city. With Max by his side, Thomas approached the front door and knocked. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes and a wary expression. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. "Miss Clara, my name is Thomas. I'm a doctor at the hospital where your brother Edward passed away." Thomas hesitated, unsure of how to broach the subject. "I've been taking care of his dog, Max, and I wanted to learn more about Edward's final days." Clara's eyes softened at the mention of Max. "Max," she whispered, her voice tinged with emotion. "I haven't seen that little dog since Edward fell ill. Please come in." Inside, Clara explained the fractured relationship she'd had with her brother. They'd grown apart over the years due to a misunderstanding about their parents' inheritance. Edward had always been stubborn, and Clara admitted that her pride had kept her from reaching out to mend things. "When I heard he was sick, I thought about visiting," she said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't know how he'd react. I didn't want to make things worse."
Thomas listened carefully, noting the regret in Clara's voice. "He spoke about you in his letter." He offered gently. "Ted was clear he cared about you, even if things were complicated." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to pat Max's head. "I should have been there for him," she murmured. And for Max, Edward loved this little dog more than anything. Their conversation took an unexpected turn. When Clara revealed something Thomas hadn't known, Edward had been trying to reconcile with her in his final months. He had left messages, sent letters, and even attempted to visit her home. "But I was too afraid to answer," Clara admitted. "I thought it was too late." Hearing this, Thomas felt a surge of determination. "It's not too late to honor his memory," he said. "You can help me take care of Max and ensure Edward's story isn't forgotten." Clara nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I want to make things right for Edward and for Max." As Clara and Thomas began to collaborate, new challenges emerged. Clara suggested visiting Edward's old home to retrieve any items he might have left behind for Max. The house had been locked since Edward's hospitalization, and the thought of going through his belongings was daunting for both of them. Still, they agreed it was necessary. The visit to Edward's home was an emotional one. The small, cluttered house was filled with memories of a man who had lived simply but deeply. Max immediately recognized the space, wagging his tail excitedly as he sniffed around. In the living room, they found a worn-out blanket that Max seemed particularly drawn to. Clara folded it carefully, her hands trembling. In a drawer near the kitchen, Thomas discovered a box filled with photographs and letters. Among them was a journal Edward had kept during his illness, flipping through its pages. Thomas was struck by the depth of Edward's love for Max. "This dog saved me," one entry read. "He gave me a reason to keep going, even when everything felt hopeless." The journal also revealed something unexpected. Edward had been planning to set up a fund for animal shelters in his community, a way to give back to the creatures that had brought him so much comfort. However, his illness had progressed too quickly for him to finalize the details. Thomas shared this discovery with Clara, who immediately latched onto the idea. "We have to make this happen," she said firmly. It's what Edward would have wanted, but turning Edward's dream into reality wasn't going to be easy. Thomas and Clara began reaching out to local shelters and organizations, pitching the idea of a memorial fund in Edward's name. They encountered resistance at first. Some shelters were skeptical, others lacked the resources to participate. But Thomas's passion for the project eventually won people over. Max became the face of their campaign, his loyalty and resilience inspiring everyone who heard his story. A photo of Max sitting beside Edward's framed letter became the centerpiece of their promotional materials, and donations began to pour in from neighbors, hospital staff, and even strangers who had heard about Edward's story. As the fund grew, Thomas noticed a change in Clara. The guilt and sadness that had once consumed her began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. She started volunteering at a local shelter, spending time with dogs who reminded her of Max. Thomas, too, felt a renewed sense of fulfillment. Balancing his work at the hospital with his efforts for the fund wasn't easy, but every time he saw Max wagging his tail or received a thank you note from a shelter, he knew it was worth it. As the memorial fund for Edward's legacy gained momentum, Thomas and Clara found themselves working more closely together. Their shared mission to honor Edward brought them a sense of healing, but it also exposed deep-seated emotions and unresolved regrets that neither had anticipated. One afternoon, Thomas invited Clara to visit the hospital where Edward had spent his final days. He believed it would help her connect with the brother she had lost and give her closure. Clara hesitated at first, visibly uneasy. "I don't know if I can face it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this alone," Thomas reassured her. "Max and I will be right there with you." Clara looked at Max, who wagged his tail enthusiastically, as if encouraging her to take the step. She nodded, her resolve firming. "Okay, let's do it." At the hospital, Thomas led Clara to the ward where Edward had been treated. The sterile halls and faint smell of antiseptic brought back a flood of memories for Thomas, but he focused on Clara, whose eyes darted around nervously. They stopped outside the room where Edward had stayed. "This is it," Thomas said softly, gesturing to the door. Clara hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. "What if I can't do this?" she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Thomas placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Take your time. Edward would understand." With a deep breath, Clara pushed the door open. The room was empty, but it still bore traces of Edward's presence. A framed picture of Max left by the bedside, a stack of books he'd been reading, and the faint scent of lavender from the air freshener he'd favored. Clara stepped inside, her composure crumbling as she saw the photo of Max. "He really loved you, didn't he?" she said, kneeling down to stroke the dog's head. Max wagged his tail and licked her hand as if offering comfort. Thomas watched silently, giving Clara space to process her emotions. After a few moments, she stood and turned to him. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "I needed this." As they left the hospital, Clara opened up about her feelings of guilt. "I wasted so much time being angry with Edward," she confessed. "And for what? A few dollars from our parents' estate. It seems so trivial now." Thomas nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "Regret can be heavy," he said, "but it's what we do with it that matters. You're honoring Edward's memory now, and that's what counts." Clara smiled faintly. "I just hope it's enough." Meanwhile, the Memorial Fund was beginning to attract attention beyond their community. A local news outlet reached out to Thomas and Clara asking to feature Max's story as part of a segment on the healing power of animals. Thomas was hesitant at first, worried about exposing Max to too much attention, but Clara saw it as an opportunity to expand Edward's legacy. This could bring in so much support for the shelters, she argued. "It's what Edward would have wanted," Thomas agreed reluctantly, and the interview was scheduled. On the day of the shoot, Max was a natural, charming the reporters with his friendly demeanor and heartwarming story. The segment aired later that week, and the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, and people from across the state reached out to express their admiration for Edward's dedication to animals. Despite the success of the campaign, Thomas found himself grappling with his own emotions. Caring for Max and working on the fund had filled a void in his life, but it also forced him to confront the loneliness he had buried beneath his work. He began to wonder if his connection with Max was more about filling his own emotional gaps than truly honoring Edward's wishes. One evening, as Thomas sat on the couch with Max, Clara stopped by unexpectedly. She carried a box of Edward's belongings, which she had been sorting through. "I thought you might want this," she said, handing it to Thomas. Inside the box were Edward's handwritten letters, photos, and a collection of dog training guides. Thomas pulled out one of the letters addressed to whomever takes care of Max. As he read Edward's heartfelt words of gratitude for whoever would love and protect Max, Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "He trusted you," Clara said softly. "And I can see why." Thomas looked at Clara, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been struggling," he admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing this for Max or for myself." Clara placed a hand on his arm. "It's okay to feel that way. We're human. But what you're doing for Max and for Edward goes beyond that. You've given Max a home, and you've given Edward's story a voice. That's not selfish. That's love. Her words resonated deeply with Thomas. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully embrace the bond he had formed with Max, not as a replacement for the relationships he lacked, but as a testament to the love and loyalty Edward had instilled in the little dog. The success of the Memorial Fund had brought renewed purpose to both Thomas and Clara, but it also attracted unforeseen challenges. With Max's story gaining widespread attention, the shelter received an influx of adoption applications, donations, and even offers to feature Max in national campaigns. What seemed like an opportunity soon became a logistical and emotional strain one day. As Thomas reviewed emails at the shelter, an unexpected visitor arrived. A man in his late 40s, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, introduced himself as Gerald Parker, a representative from a high-profile marketing agency.
His proposal was bold. Max would become the face of a nationwide campaign for pet adoption awareness, complete with commercials, public appearances, and merchandise. Thomas hesitated. Max is more than just a story. He's family. I don't want to exploit him. Gerald leaned in, his tone persuasive. This isn't about exploitation, it's about amplifying his impact. Think of how many lives Max could change, both animals and humans. It's what Edward would have wanted. Clara, who had joined the meeting, was torn. The campaign could bring unprecedented attention to their cause, but it also risked overexposing Max and detracting from Edward's personal story. We need time to think about this, she said firmly. That evening, Thomas and Clara debated the proposal. Clara leaned toward accepting, emphasizing the potential benefits. This could fund the shelter for years. We could save so many animals, Thomas. But Thomas was reluctant. Max has been through enough. I don't want to turn him into a commodity. Their argument grew heated, unearthing deeper tensions. Clara accused Thomas of holding back out of fear. While Thomas questioned whether Clara truly understood the emotional weight of their journey with Max as their voices rose, Max, sensing the tension, whimpered softly and nudged Thomas's leg. The gesture broke the intensity of the moment, and both Thomas and Clara fell silent, guilt washing over them. Maybe we're too close to this, Clara admitted quietly. We need to make a decision that's best for Max, not for us. The next day, as Thomas pondered the campaign offer, a stranger approached him at the shelter, a young woman named Elena. She introduced herself as a veterinary technician who had known Edward through his volunteer work. Elena revealed a surprising detail. Edward had once considered starting a mobile veterinary clinic for underserved areas, inspired by Max's ability to bring comfort to those in need. Thomas was taken aback. He never mentioned this to me, Elena smiled. It was just an idea he was exploring. But he talked about it with such passion. He wanted to help people and their pets no matter where they were. The revelation stirred something in Thomas. It added a new layer to Edward's legacy, one that went beyond Max's story. Thomas shared this with Clara, and together they wondered if this could be a better way to honor Edward's vision. As they began researching the feasibility of a mobile clinic, strange developments began to unfold. Thomas noticed unfamiliar faces lingering near the shelter, and one evening he found a note slipped under the door. It read, "Max doesn't belong to you." Alarmed, Thomas showed the note to Clara. "What do you think this means?" he asked, his voice edged with worry. Clara's expression darkened. "Do you think someone's claiming to have a connection to Max? Maybe they think he's valuable because of the publicity." Thomas couldn't shake the unease that settled over him. They decided to install security cameras around the shelter and notify local authorities, but the incident weighed heavily on both of them. Days later, Gerald Parker called, pressing for an answer on the campaign. Thomas and Clara agreed to meet with him one last time to clarify their concerns. The meeting quickly took a surprising turn when Gerald revealed that another organization had reached out, claiming to be Max's original owner. "They're threatening legal action if Max isn't returned," Gerald said. "This could complicate everything." Thomas's heart sank. Max had been Edward's loyal companion for years, There was no doubt about his rightful place, but the idea of someone else trying to take him away was terrifying. "Do they have proof?" Clara asked, her voice tight. Gerald shook his head. "Not yet, but with all the attention Max has received, it's not uncommon for people to fabricate claims. You need to be prepared." That evening, Thomas sat alone with Max, stroking his fur as the dog lay curled at his feet. "What are we going to do, buddy?" he murmured. Max looked up at him with trusting eyes, and Thomas felt a surge of determination. He decided to dig deeper into Edward's records, hoping to find something that would irrefutably prove Max's history. Late into the night, Thomas searched through Edward's old documents, eventually uncovering a worn envelope containing adoption papers for Max. The papers detailed Edward's adoption of Max from a rescue organization years ago, complete with photos and signatures. Relief washed over Thomas, but it was short-lived. He realized that if this fabricated claim gained traction, it could still harm their mission and overshadow Edward's legacy. The tension reached a breaking point when Clara received a call from Gerald. The campaign was moving forward with or without their involvement, using another dog as the face of the project. "This doesn't feel right," Clara said after relaying the news to Thomas. "They're exploiting the story without understanding what it means." Thomas nodded. "Then we'll do it our way. Edward's dream of a mobile clinic, let's make it happen." As they doubled down on their plans for the clinic, Thomas and Clara faced the mounting pressures of the fabricated claim, the campaign controversy, and their personal struggles. But through it all, Max remained their anchor, his unwavering loyalty reminding them of the love and resilience Edward had cherished. Thomas and Clara's decision to pursue Edward's dream of a mobile veterinary clinic reignited their passion for their mission. But the challenges ahead loomed larger than ever. Despite uncovering Max's adoption papers, the fabricated claim against Max's ownership gained attention online, spurred by the widespread publicity of his story. Anonymous commentators questioned their integrity, and some even accused them of exploiting Max for financial gain. To combat the negativity, Thomas and Clara decided to share Edward's story in its entirety. His love for animals, his vision for underserved communities, and how Max had been a symbol of hope for him during his darkest times. They planned a heartfelt event at the shelter, inviting local supporters, former colleagues of Edward, and even the media. It was a chance to reclaim the narrative. On the day of the event, the shelter buzzed with activity. Volunteers arranged photographs of Edward and Max, showcasing their shared journey. While Clara finalized the presentation, Max seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, staying close to Thomas and greeting every visitor with his gentle presence. As the guests gathered, Thomas stood in front of a screen displaying a slideshow of Edward's life. Taking a deep breath, he began. Edward wasn't just a dog lover, he was a dreamer. He believed in creating a world where every animal had a chance to heal and every person could find solace in their companionship. Max was a cornerstone of that dream. The audience listened intently as Thomas recounted Edward's aspirations for the mobile clinic and how Max had inspired him, Clara added. "This isn't just about one dog, it's about the connection we share with animals and the transformative power they bring to our lives." Edward wanted that connection to reach everyone, especially those who needed it most. By the end of the event, the room was filled with applause and renewed support. Donations poured in and local businesses pledged resources for the mobile clinic. It was a turning point, but not everyone in the crowd was there to cheer. As the event wrapped up, a woman approached Thomas and Clara with a guarded expression, introducing herself as Samantha. She claimed to be part of the family who had originally fostered Max before Edward adopted him. Her presence was unexpected, and her words carried an edge of resentment. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Samantha began, "but I need you to understand that Max wasn't always yours. My parents cared for him first. They loved him, and when circumstances forced us to give him up, it broke our hearts." Thomas studied her carefully. There was no malice in her tone, but her words added a layer of complexity to the story. "I'm sorry for what you went through," he said sincerely. "But Edward adopted Max legally, and they shared a bond that was unbreakable." Samantha nodded, her eyes softening. "I've seen how much Max means to you. I just wanted you to know where he came from. He brought joy to my family before he brought it to yours." Clara stepped forward, extending a hand. "Thank you for sharing that with us. It's clear Max has touched many lives. We'd love to hear more about his time with your family, if you're willing." Samantha hesitated but eventually agreed to meet again. It was a delicate connection that hinted at new perspectives on Max's story. Meanwhile, the controversy surrounding Gerald Parker's campaign escalated. The alternative dog chosen for the project bore an uncanny resemblance to Max, and the marketing materials heavily implied a connection to Edward's story. Outraged, Thomas confronted Gerald in a tense phone call. "You're misleading people," Thomas said, his voice firm. "This isn't about awareness anymore, it's about profit." Gerald's response was dismissive. "The public loves a good story. If you're not willing to play ball, don't blame me for finding someone who will." The call left Thomas fuming, but it also strengthened his resolve. He and Clara focused their energy on the mobile clinic, determined to build something authentic. That honored Edward's legacy. In the weeks that followed, Samantha became a surprising ally. She shared old photos of Max as a puppy, along with anecdotes about his early life. These stories painted a fuller picture of Max's journey, one that bridged two families united by their love for him. Samantha's involvement also brought unexpected insights into Edward's character. He visited us after the adoption, she revealed one evening. He wanted to make sure we were okay with the transition. He even sent updates about Max for years. Edward had a way of making people feel seen. Thomas and Clara were moved by this revelation. It deepened their understanding of Edward's kindness and inspired them to incorporate a similar ethos into the mobile clinic, offering not just care for animals, but emotional support for the people connected to them. As the mobile clinic plans progressed, unexpected partnerships emerged. A local veterinary college offered to provide interns. While a logistics company donated a van for the clinic's use, the community's involvement became a testament to Edward's enduring influence. However, the fabricated ownership claim resurfaced in the form of legal threats. An anonymous party filed a petition alleging that Max's adoption had procedural irregularities. Though Thomas and Clara knew the claim was baseless, the legal process threatened to stall their progress. Faced with this new challenge, Thomas reached out to Samantha for advice. Her connections within the local animal welfare community proved invaluable. "Let me help," she offered. "Max deserves to stay where he belongs." Her involvement marked a shift in their relationship, transforming an initial tension into a partnership rooted in mutual respect for Max's legacy. The challenges, alliances, and emotional bonds formed during this period set the stage for a critical turning point. The fabricated claims and Gerald's exploitative campaign were no longer just obstacles. They became catalysts for Thomas and Clara to solidify their vision for the mobile clinic and defend Edward's dream with renewed vigor. The fabricated legal claims surrounding Max's adoption intensified, pulling Thomas and Clara into a whirlwind of paperwork, court filings, and public scrutiny. Gerald Parker seized the opportunity, further exploiting the controversy to amplify his campaign. His advertisements blatantly hinted that Max's current home might not be legitimate, stoking doubts among the community. What if we lose Max? Clara voiced her fear one late evening as they sat in the shelter's office, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of documents. Max lay at their feet, his head resting on Thomas's shoe, seemingly unaware of the turmoil surrounding him. Thomas reached down, scratching behind Max's ears. "We won't let that happen," he said with quiet determination. "Edward trusted us, and we'll fight for him just like he'd fight for us." The legal battle began to weigh on them. Court hearings loomed, and every moment spent away from Max felt like a betrayal. Samantha, who had become a staunch ally, offered to testify on their behalf, providing evidence of Edward's proper adoption process and Max's well-being under their care. The night before their first hearing, an unexpected visitor arrived at the shelter. Air courier delivered an envelope marked confidential. Inside was a letter from someone claiming to have insider knowledge of Gerald Parker's operation. It detailed how Gerald's team had fabricated the ownership claims and manufactured false documentation to sabotage Thomas and Clara's efforts. "This could change everything," Clara said, her hands trembling as she read the letter aloud. "But how do we know it's real?" Thomas examined the documents enclosed. They included emails, internal memos, and receipts tied to Gerald's team. "We'll have to validate these," he said cautiously. "But if this checks out, it's the proof we need to expose him." The following morning, Thomas and Clara presented the evidence to their lawyer, who immediately recognized its significance. "This isn't just about clearing Max's name," she said. "If these documents are real, Gerald could face serious consequences." In court, Thomas and Clara stood firm, supported by Samantha and other community members who had rallied to their cause. The opposing side attempted to cast doubt on their claims, but their lawyer methodically dismantled the fabricated allegations, presenting the damning evidence against Gerald's team. Gerald's lawyer grew visibly uneasy as the judge scrutinized the documents. When questioned about the authenticity of the claims, Gerald deflected, insisting he had acted in the best interest of animal welfare. However, the judge's skepticism was evident. The tension in the courtroom reached a boiling point when Samantha took the stand. Her heartfelt testimony painted a vivid picture of Max's journey, from his time with her family to Edward's unwavering love and care, and finally to the shelter that had become his home. Her words moved the audience, even drawing tears from some. "Max isn't just a dog," she concluded. "He's a symbol of hope and resilience, and he belongs with the people who honor Edward's legacy." The judge's decision was swift. The fabricated claims were dismissed, and Gerald's campaign was publicly discredited. Outside the courthouse, Thomas, Clara, and Samantha embraced as reporters swarmed them with questions. "Max is staying where he belongs," Thomas declared, his voice steady despite the emotional toll of the battle. "And Edward's dream lives on, while the legal victory was a relief." It didn't mark the end of their struggles. Gerald's fallout left a trail of mistrust in the community, and many questioned how such deception could occur. Determined to restore faith in their mission, Thomas and Clara decided to host a large-scale event to officially launch the mobile clinic. It would be a chance to reaffirm their commitment to Edward's vision and celebrate the community's role in making it a reality. In the days leading up to the event, tensions simmered as remnants of Gerald's influence lingered. Anonymous threats and attempts to discredit their work continued, but Thomas and Clara refused to be deterred. Instead, they channeled their energy into preparing for the launch, enlisting volunteers and spreading the word about the clinic's mission. On the morning of the event, Max seemed to embody the spirit of resilience that had defined their journey. His presence drew children and adults alike, his wagging tail and gentle demeanor bringing smiles to everyone he encountered. Thomas couldn't help but think of Edward, and how proud he would be to see this moment. The event drew an even larger crowd than expected. Local news outlets covered the story, and the shelter's social media pages were flooded with messages of support. Thomas and Clara stood side by side as they unveiled the clinic, a sleek, customized vehicle adorned with Edward's favorite quote, "Every animal deserves a second chance, and every person deserves the joy they bring," as the crowd erupted in applause. Thomas felt a wave of emotion. This wasn't just the culmination of their efforts. It was a testament to the power of community, perseverance, and the bond between humans and animals. Yet amidst the celebration, a lingering question remained. How would Gerald respond to his public disgrace? Thomas and Clara knew they couldn't let their guard down, especially with the clinic's future at stake. The celebration of the mobile clinic's launch was a resounding success. But Thomas and Clara remained vigilant. The shadow of Gerald Parker's schemes loomed large, and they anticipated retaliation. True to their fears, Gerald wasn't about to fade quietly into obscurity. In the days following his courtroom disgrace, he launched a smear campaign, leveraging his remaining influence to sow doubt about the shelter and the mobile clinic. Online anonymous accounts began posting accusations, claiming the shelter mishandled funds, fabricated Max's adoption story, and exploited the community for personal gain. Gerald's allies placed inflammatory ads in local newspapers, reigniting skepticism among those who hadn't fully embraced Thomas and Clara's vision. "His network is deeper than we thought," Clara said one evening, scrolling through the avalanche of false accusations. "If we let this fester, it could undo everything we've worked for." Thomas nodded grimly. "We can't fight him in the shadows. We need to bring everything to light and force him into the open. Thomas and Clara decided to organize a town hall meeting inviting members of the community to hear the full story of Max, the mobile clinic, and Edward's legacy. They also planned to present irrefutable evidence of Gerald's manipulations, turning the tide of public opinion once and for all. Samantha volunteered to help, using her connections in the community to spread the word. "If we show them who Gerald really is, they'll see the truth," she said, her voice resolute. On the night of the town hall, the venue was packed with concerned citizens, reporters, and local leaders. Gerald Parker himself arrived, flanked by a few remaining loyalists. His smug demeanor made it clear he didn't expect to lose this battle. Thomas took the stage first, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. He began by recounting Edward's dream of the shelter, the sacrifices he made, and the impact it had on countless animals and families. Clara followed, detailing the challenges they faced after Edward's passing, including the smear campaign orchestrated by Gerald. "Everything we've built has been for the animals and the community," Clara said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But there are those who would tear it all down for personal gain." When Samantha took the stage, she revealed the insider documents exposing Gerald's fabrications. She displayed email exchanges, financial records, and testimonies from whistleblowers who had worked for Gerald. Gasps rippled through the audience as the extent of his deceit came to light. "This isn't just about Max," Samantha concluded. "It's about standing up to corruption and protecting what's right." Gerald stood abruptly, his face red with anger. "This is nothing but a smear job against me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. "You can't prove half of this nonsense." Thomas calmly stepped forward, holding up the court's dismissal of Gerald's fabricated claims. "We already did," he said firmly. "The court saw through your lies, and now the community does too." The tension in the room was palpable as Gerald's allies began to murmur among themselves, some quietly slipping out the door. The remaining audience erupted in applause, their support for Thomas, Clara, and Samantha evident. Gerald's final attempt to salvage his reputation came in the form of a hastily scheduled press conference the following day. He claimed to be the victim of a conspiracy, accusing Thomas and Clara of bribery and collusion. However, his credibility was shattered, and his audience dwindled to few loyalists. The shelter's supporters, on the other hand, rallied like never before. Donations poured in, volunteers flocked to help, and the community united around Edward's vision, the mobile clinic, which had been met with skepticism during its launch, now symbolized resilience and hope. In the midst of this renewed momentum, Clara received a call from a local news station. They wanted to feature Max's story in a primetime segment, highlighting the shelter's work and the clinic's potential impact. It was an opportunity to amplify their mission and solidify their place in the community. During the interview, Thomas shared his journey with Max, his voice brimming with pride and gratitude. "Max isn't just a dog to us," he said. "He represents everything Edward stood for. Love, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between people and animals," Clara added. "This shelter and the mobile clinic aren't just projects, they're a promise to Edward and to every animal and person who needs a helping hand." As the segment aired, it sparked an outpouring of support, further isolating Gerald and cementing Thomas and Clara's position in the community. But their victory wasn't without its costs. The relentless battle had taken an emotional toll, and they knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. One evening, as they sat on the shelter's porch, Max lying contentedly at their feet, Clara voiced the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Do you think it's over?" she asked softly. Thomas stared out at the horizon, the fading light casting a warm glow over the shelter. "Gerald's influence is fading," he said. "But people like him don't give up easily. We need to stay vigilant." Clara nodded, her hand resting on Max's head. "At least we have each other and Max." Thomas smiled, the weight on his shoulders feeling a little lighter in Edward's dream. He added, "No matter what comes next, we'll keep it alive." Despite Gerald Parker's retreat into obscurity, the fallout from his schemes left lingering challenges for the shelter. Some community members still harbored doubts, remnants of Gerald's smear campaign. The mobile clinic faced unexpected hurdles, including resistance from local policymakers influenced by remnants of Gerald's network. Thomas and Clara knew they had won the battle, but the war for trust and stability wasn't entirely over. In response, they intensified their efforts to demonstrate the clinic's value. Weekly open houses at the shelter showcased their work, and mobile clinic visits to underserved neighborhoods became community events. Max, the story's hero, played a pivotal role, his gentle presence drawing people in and breaking down barriers. But the tipping point came unexpectedly in the form of a crisis that tested the shelter and clinic's resilience. One stormy evening, Clara received an urgent call from Samantha. A nearby industrial site had reported a chemical spill, and the surrounding area was being evacuated. Reports came in of stray animals trapped in the flood zone, their lives at risk as the toxic water rose. "We need to act fast," Samantha said, her voice urgent. "The authorities are overwhelmed and they can't focus on the animals." Thomas and Clara sprang into action, rallying their team and preparing the mobile clinic for its most critical mission yet. Volunteers loaded crates, mine supplies, and medical equipment, while Clara coordinated with local authorities to ensure access to the evacuation zone. As they approached the area, the scene was chaotic. Floodwaters surged through the streets and frightened animals huddled on rooftops and in abandoned buildings. Thomas guided the team, his voice calm but firm. "We split into groups. Safety first, no risk we can't handle." The rescue mission was harrowing. Clara waded through waist-deep water to coax a terrified dog out of a submerged yard. Samantha and another volunteer climbed onto a roof. To reach a stranded cat, Max, sensing the urgency, seemed to become an active participant, barking encouragement to the animals they saved. But the operation wasn't without its dangers. At one point, Thomas found himself on unstable ground, the rushing water threatening to sweep him away. As he struggled to maintain his footing, Max appeared beside him, his steady presence giving Thomas the focus he needed to regain balance and save a frightened puppy. By dawn, the team had rescued dozens of animals. Exhausted but exhilarated, they returned to the shelter, where the mobile clinic sprang into action. Injured and frightened animals were treated, fed, and comforted. The sight of Max gently licking a kitten's wounds became a symbol of hope amid the chaos. News of the rescue spread rapidly, garnering widespread attention. Local reporters flocked to the shelter, capturing images of the rescued animals. And the tireless efforts of the team, Thomas and Clara, were interviewed, their words reflecting both the urgency of the crisis and the dedication of their mission. "This is why we do what we do," Clara told a reporter, her voice thick with emotion. "Every life matters, and we'll always be here to protect and care for those who can't protect themselves." The rescue operation not only solidified the shelter's reputation, but also galvanized the community. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up in record numbers, and the mobile clinic schedule was booked for months. Even policymakers who had once opposed their work publicly praised the shelter's efforts. Amid the triumph, Gerald Parker made one last desperate move. He filed a frivolous lawsuit against the shelter, claiming that the mobile clinic had endangered public safety during the rescue mission. His accusations, however, fell flat. The overwhelming evidence of the clinic's positive impact left him isolated, his reputation irreparably damaged. In a dramatic court hearing, Thomas and Clara presented testimony from rescued pet owners, local authorities, and medical professionals who had witnessed the clinic's effectiveness firsthand. Gerald's case was dismissed within hours, and he was ordered to pay the shelter's legal fees. The verdict marked the final nail in the coffin for Gerald's schemes. As he slinked away from the courtroom, the weight of his defeat was palpable. The shelter, meanwhile, emerged stronger than ever. In the weeks that followed, Thomas and Clara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Sitting on the shelter's porch one evening with Max lying contentedly at their feet, they shared a quiet moment of triumph. "We've come a long way," Thomas said, his voice tinged with wonder. "From losing Edward to facing Gerald, and now this. It feels like we've finally turned a corner." Clara nodded, her gaze soft as she stroked Max's fur. "It's not just about the shelter or the clinic," she said. "It's about the connections we've built, the lives we've touched. That's Edward's legacy." Max raised his head as if sensing the significance of the moment, his gentle eyes reflecting the love and gratitude that had come to define their journey. The shelter was bustling with activity one bright afternoon. its courtyard filled with volunteers and community members celebrating the success of the rescue mission. The rescued animals, now healthy and full of life, frolicked around their joy, a testament to the resilience of the shelter's mission. Thomas stood at the center, addressing the crowd. Today isn't just a celebration of what we accomplished during the storm. It's a celebration of what we've become together, a family, a community, and most importantly, a lifeline for those who need us most. His voice carried a sincerity that resonated deeply with everyone present. Clara, standing beside him, held back tears as the crowd erupted in applause. Max, ever the symbol of their triumphs, barked joyfully, prompting laughter. As the celebration continued, a familiar figure appeared at the entrance to the courtyard. It was Lisa, the woman whose puppy Max had saved during the storm. Clutching a small bouquet of flowers, she hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. The crowd parted, and Thomas and Clara moved to greet her. "I just wanted to thank you," Lisa said, her voice trembling with emotion. "If it hadn't been for you and your team, my little Daisy wouldn't be here today." Thomas smiled warmly. "We were just doing what needed to be done." Lisa knelt to pet Max, who wagged his tail enthusiastically. "And you," she said, her voice soft as she looked into Max's eyes. "For you're a hero." The moment was simple but profound, a reminder of the lives they had touched and the impact of their work. Later that evening, as the sun set and the crowd began to disperse, Clara pulled Thomas aside. "There's something I've been meaning to show you," she said, her tone carrying a hint of mystery. She led him to the mobile clinic, now parked at the edge of the courtyard. Inside, the space had been transformed. Photos of rescued animals lined the walls alongside thank you notes from their owners. At the center of it all was a framed picture of Edward, his gentle smile, a reminder of the vision that had started it all. "This is our tribute to him," Clara explained, her voice thick with emotion. "Everything we've built, everything we've overcome, it's all because of his dream." Thomas stared at the display, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and sorrow. "He'd be proud," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As they stepped out of the clinic, a commotion at the shelter's gate drew their attention. A group of children, accompanied by a teacher, approached. Carrying handmade signs that read, "Thank you" and "Heroes of the Storm," the children had been inspired by the shelter's story and wanted to express their gratitude. They presented Thomas and Clara with a large banner signed with heartfelt messages of thanks and adorned with drawings of animals. One little boy stepped forward, holding out a drawing of Max. "He's my favorite hero," the boy said shyly, looking up at Thomas. Thomas knelt to take the drawing, his eyes glistening. "He's my favorite too," he said, patting Max's head. As the night fell, the shelter grew quiet, the day's events leaving a lingering sense of fulfillment. Thomas and Clara sat on the porch with Max between them, their thoughts turning to the future. "We've come full circle," Clara said, her voice thoughtful. "From nearly losing everything to building something stronger than we ever imagined." Thomas nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "And it's just the beginning. There's so much more we can do, so many more lives we can save." Max rested his head on Clara's lap, his presence a silent affirmation of their journey. In his eyes, they saw the spirit of resilience and hope that had carried them through every challenge. As they reflected on the day, a message came through on Clara's phone. It was from a national animal welfare organization, inviting the shelter to join a collaborative initiative aimed at expanding resources for underserved communities. Clara's eyes widened as she read the details. "Thomas," she said, her voice tinged with excitement, "this could be the opportunity we've been waiting for." Thomas took the phone, scanning the message. A smile spread across his face. "It's perfect," he said. "Edward's dream is about to reach even further." The climax of their journey was not just about overcoming adversity, but about setting the stage for a brighter future. The shelter had become more than a sanctuary. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of perseverance and compassion. Max, ever the heart of their story, looked up at Thomas and Clara, his eyes filled with the quiet wisdom of a soul who had seen it all. As the stars lit up the night sky, they knew that their work was far from over. But in that moment, surrounded by the love they had cultivated, they felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The days following the celebration marked the beginning of a new chapter for the shelter. News of their heroic efforts during the storm spread far and wide, drawing attention from animal lovers, volunteers, and donors across the country. For Thomas, Clara, and Max, this newfound recognition was not just an opportunity, but a responsibility to continue their mission with even greater resolve. The shelter, once struggling to make ends meet, now buzzed with activity. Volunteers worked tirelessly, inspired by the shelter's story. Donations flooded in, and enabling them to expand their facilities, purchase new equipment, and enhance their outreach programs. A new wing was being constructed to accommodate more animals in need, complete with state-of-the-art medical equipment for the clinic. Max, the symbol of their resilience, had become a local celebrity. Visitors flocked to meet the dog who had braved the storm and saved countless lives. Children giggled as they petted him, and families shared stories of how Max's courage had inspired them. One sunny afternoon, Thomas stood in front of a group of new volunteers sharing the shelter's story. "This place," he said, gesturing around him, "is a testament to what happens when we come together for a greater purpose. Each of you has the power to make a difference, not just in the lives of these animals, but in the hearts of everyone they touch." Clara joined him, holding Max's leash. "Max taught us something invaluable." She added that even in the darkest of times, there's always light. That every act of kindness, no matter how small, creates ripples that can change the world. The volunteers listened intently, their faces alight with determination. For many, this was more than just a cause. It was a chance to be part of something meaningful. One sunny afternoon, Thomas stood in front of a group of new volunteers sharing the shelter's story. "This place," he said, gesturing around him, "is a testament to what happens when we come together for a greater purpose. Each of you has the power to make a difference, not just in the lives of these animals, but in the hearts of everyone they touch." Clara joined him, holding Max's leash. "Max taught us something invaluable," she added, "that even in the darkest of times, there's always light. That every act of kindness, no matter how small, creates ripples that can change the world." The volunteers listened intently, their faces alight with determination. For many, this was more than just a cause. It was a chance to be part of something meaningful. As the shelter grew, so did its impact. Clara took the lead on a new initiative, partnering with local schools to educate children about animal welfare and the importance of kindness. Max, ever the hero, became the program's mascot, visiting classrooms and delighting students with his gentle nature. Thomas focused on expanding their reach to rural communities, ensuring no animal was left behind. He worked late into the night, poring over plans and strategies, driven by the memory of Edward's unwavering dedication. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas and Clara sat on the porch of the newly renovated shelter. Max lay at their feet, his eyes half closed in contentment. The air was filled with the soft hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. "We've come so far," Clara said, her voice tinged with both pride and disbelief. Thomas nodded. "But there's still so much to do." Clara placed a hand on his arm. "And we'll do it together." They sat in comfortable silence, their thoughts intertwined with the memories of their journey, the challenges they had faced, the lives they had saved, and the lessons they had learned. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Clara turned to Thomas with a smile. "Do you think Edward ever imagined this?" she asked, her voice soft. Thomas looked out at the shelter, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. "I think he did," he said, "and I think he'd be proud." Max lifted his head, as if sensing the moment's significance. He wagged his tail, a silent affirmation of all they had achieved the next morning. Thomas and Clara stood in front of the shelter's new sign, unveiled during a special ceremony. It read, "Edward's Haven, a shelter of hope." Beneath it was an inscription in memory of Edward, whose dream lives on in every life we touch. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers, a celebration of not just the shelter's accomplishments, but the spirit of unity and compassion that had brought them here. As Thomas addressed the crowd, he felt a surge of emotion. "This isn't just a shelter," he said. It's a testament to the power of love, resilience, and community. Every life saved here is a reminder of what we can achieve together. As the story of Edward's Haven continued to unfold, it became a beacon of hope for animals and humans alike. Its impact reached far beyond its walls, touching hearts and inspiring change in communities everywhere. Max, the heart of the shelter's story, remained a constant presence. His courage and loyalty, a symbol of all they stood for. Together, Thomas, Clara, and Max carried forward Edward's dream one life at a time. If you were inspired by this story, join us in making a difference. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of courage, resilience, and hope. And don't miss our next story, another incredible journey that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of compassion. Click here to watch now.